Today we're going to be discussing the possible pros and also cons of artificial sweeteners, including the entire debate around whether some artificial sweeteners such as aspartame can cause certain types of cancers. All of the resources that I'll be using are linked down in the description box below, and all of them are pretty recent. They have been published after the year of 2020, and more research is coming out all of the time, so this topic is definitely not closed yet. Enough rambling, let's get right into the video. So what are the possible benefits of artificial sweeteners? Why did they become so popular in the first place? If you clicked on the video, I assume that you know what an artificial sweetener is, but in case you don't, artificial sweeteners are substances that mimic the sweetness of sugar, but they are tens, hundreds, and sometimes even thousands of times sweeter than sugar itself. And they were developed with the argument that manufacturers can use very little amounts of them in a drink or food, and this is going to generate the same sweet effects as sugar does, but with very little amounts. Therefore, you can imagine that this is going to have a lot less calories than the same beverage if it was containing the sugar to generate the same sweet response. This is why artificial sweeteners are usually found in the diet versions or the sugar-free versions of foods and beverages. A very common example would be Coke Zero versus normal Coke. Normal Coke has sugar in it, while the Coke Zero has a combination of artificial sweeteners in it. A lot of foods and beverages have combinations, not just one artificial sweetener on their ingredients list, and this is because they are not perfect. They cannot ideally generate the same sweet taste as sugar most of the time, and some of them have a metallic aftertaste, a bitter aftertaste. Some of them are not heat stable or are not well soluble in water, so using combinations of them usually is a way to make them more appealing for the consumer. Therefore, I believe you can already imagine that the main benefit of artificial sweeteners is that they have no calories in them. Because of this, their use became very popular with the rise in the rates of obesity and type 2 diabetes. There had to be new ways found for people to manage their weight in this obesogenic environment where very attractive foods are all around us. And this was a way where manufacturers can make a lot of money and maybe potentially create some benefit for the consumer. The research around weight loss due to swapping artificially sweetened beverages with the normal version of beverages is quite contradictory for something that seems so straightforward. Of course, there are studies that support the fact that swapping out the sugar version of beverages with the artificially sweetened beverages version leads to a decrease in one's body weight. However, other observational studies indicate that a heightened consumption of artificially sweetened beverages over longer periods of time is actually correlated to an increase in the risk of obesity and being overweight in general. To give you a hint, these trends are not exactly mediated by the caloric intake of the sweetener or the sugar itself. It is obvious that high consumptions of sugar are going to lead to a higher caloric intake, more fat gain, obesity, and all of the other problems that come from that. But artificial sweeteners have different ways in which they might also lead to the same thing, but it is not through their caloric intake. This is one of their, let's say, huge benefits. The second advantage of artificial sweeteners is that they lead to little or no release of insulin, and you can see how this already becomes a huge plus for diabetic people. Research has shown that an acute ingestion of an artificially sweetened beverage does not cause the same effects on the insulin release that the ingestion of the sugar-sweetened beverage does. It has little to no impact on the release of insulin from the beta cells in your pancreas. Therefore, this is not going to cause insulin or a glucose spike or anything, and diabetics will not have to worry about their insulin levels. In theory, this sounds like a very promising strategy to enable diabetic people still enjoy sweet things from time to time. Again, unfortunately, unfortunately, research that has been done over longer periods of time is very conflicting, and while some studies show that there is no correlation between the development of type 2 diabetes and the ingestion of artificially sweetened beverages, other research suggests a heightened correlation between those two groups. But I'm going to discuss again some other pathways that might lead to this, but it is not through the release of insulin. So this advantage is technically pretty stable. There is no controversy around this specific pathway. You can see how I'm already kind of contradicting myself, but I had to give some advantages and explain why artificial sweeteners were developed in the first place. And again, compared to sugar, they indeed have no calories and cause little to no insulin release from the pancreas. Moving on to the third and unfortunately last advantage of artificial sweeteners, and that is that they cause no dental caries. And this is probably the only one that is not controversial at all. I'm pretty sure you've heard as a child from your dentist that you should not eat a lot of sugar or you're going to have to see him often. And that is absolutely true. Artificial sweeteners do not feed the bacteria in our mouth the same way that sugar does. So it is not going to lead to the development of caries and these very unwanted, unfortunate trips that you might have to make if you enjoy a lot of sweet treats. And especially do not brush your teeth afterwards. Remember to brush your teeth at least twice a day. I also saw somewhere that you should brush your teeth technically 30 minutes before breakfast, but I forgot the argument. If you have an idea as to why that is, let me know down in the comments below. Moving on to the negative sides of artificial sweeteners, and here the list is going to be a bit longer, so brace yourselves for that. The first negative aspect of artificial sweeteners is that they might alter the gut microbiome, and this is one that became very popular and kind of common knowledge, I think, to the public with the rise of the popularity of improving our gut health. Gut health is generally quite a new topic of research, and more papers are coming out every single year in this specific field, and we definitely do not know enough about it. But the studies that are already out there have shown that the higher ingestion of artificial sweeteners might cause changes in the balance of the bacteria in our gut and lead to dysbiosis. For each artificial sweetener, the situation might look a bit different, and since we do not know enough about the gut microbiome itself, no definite conclusions can be made as to this sweetener influences the gut in that way and this specifically in that way. Here in this graph, I'm showing you basically what your gut microbiota is sort of composed of. Between 30 and 52% of your gut microbiome are the so-called Firmicutes strains. I'm probably going to mispronounce every single one of this. The second biggest group are the Bacteroidetes, and these are between 9 and 42%. I know that that's a pretty huge range, but again, you know, the gut microbiome of every single person varies, and we do not all have the same ratios in our gut. The third big group is the actinobacteria. These make up between 1 to 13% of the total bacteria, and we have 2% of other strains. One ratio that has become quite popular when talking about obesity and gut dysbiosis is the so-called F to B ratio, and this has been found to be important in obesity. From observational studies, it has been found that people who are overweight or obese have an increase in this specific ratio. So an increase in these bacteria compared to these bacteria, which might be also a consequence of becoming overweight or obese and the dietary patterns. This is not quite clear. For now, we just know that there is a connection between the two. However, having more of those is also not good for you and is not going to make you thinner. The increase in this type of bacteria, so the decrease in this ratio, has been linked to the development of gut issues such as, I believe it was inflammatory bowel disease. So you can see how dysbiosis, an imbalance of the gut bacteria, is not beneficial in any way. And if the artificial sweeteners indeed alter the gut microbiome in an unfavorable way, then that is not going to be great for you long term. And this might also be linked to why in the studies on type 2 diabetes and insulin resistance, why these people that consumed more artificial sweeteners also had a higher tendency of being insulin resistant or diabetic. So insulin resistance is not just about how much sugar you're ingesting, it is also being impacted by other different pathways. Of course, high sugar consumption also causes gut dysbiosis and is also not good for your gut health. So an optimal solution here would be just to not overconsume sweetened beverages of any kind. Again, not overconsume. You can eat your sweet treats from time to time. Why do I always say might? This is because the studies that show that there is a stronger alteration are usually done on mice, which is the biggest limitation of these studies. There is not really adequate human data that shows us that there are huge influences on the gut microbiome. Moving on to the second disadvantage of artificial sweeteners. And this is the lack of an incretin release. If you've seen my video on GLP-1 and weight loss medications, you will know what an incretin is. Incretins are hormones that are released in the gut that help boost your satiety, signal to your brain that you're full, and also are responsible for the prolonged satiety signal. One of those hormones is GLP-1, but there are also other ones such as cholecystokinin, peptide YY, and others. The consumption of artificial sweeteners does not lead to an incretin release. This appears to be nutrient dependent. I'm saying this because sugar leads to a GLP-1 response. So you see how this satiety signal, although you have consumed something sweet, is not going to be signaled to the brain. So you might actually be feeling less full and less satiated after the ingestion of the diet version of something compared to if you just had eaten the sugary version of that thing. So going for the less calorie option might not give you the best results every single time. On top of all of that, some research suggests that this way you are uncoupling the energy from the sweetness. So your brain does not associate the ingestion of sweet things with energy intake. This means that you might be more susceptible to consuming even more sweet things than you would normally, because your brain does not make this connection anymore because of the lack of the release of these gut hormones, these incretin hormones. And this might explain why in studies on obesity and artificial sweeteners, why people who have a higher consumption over time also tend to be overweight or obese, because they might be unintentionally eating more calories due to the lack of these satiety hormones. Now, briefly to mention another possible large disadvantage, this is hepatotoxicity. This means that artificial sweeteners might cause some damage to the liver, and this again has been confirmed in animal studies, and there has been association between the ingestion of artificial sweeteners and the development of the non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which is also developed after an increased consumption of sugar and fat over longer periods of time. And now we're moving on to the hottest topic of today that probably all of you are waiting for, and that is the risk of cancer development. This entire field around artificial sweeteners and cancer, I feel, is very foggy for everyone, mostly because you hear different type of information every couple of years. The first time that artificial sweeteners were associated with cancer risk was in the 1970s, where animal studies in mice again showed increase in gallbladder cancer, and this whole thing started the debate. This specific topic has been gaining more and more popularity recently with newer research coming out. You've probably read or heard someone mention at least once that aspartame is connected to an increased risk of certain cancers. And this is a finding that is observed in multiple bodies of observational research. When I say observational research, that means that there were studies that follow very large groups of people over longer periods of time, and they monitor their eating habits habits, and after a lot of years with data analysis, the researchers can make associations between the consumption of specific things and the increase of the likelihoods of a specific disease or cancer or whatever they would like to analyze. There was this study done in France with over 100,000 participants, and in this paper, this specific connection was in fact found. The increased consumption of artificial sweeteners, specifically aspartame and acesulfame-K, was linked to an increase in the risk of cancers. There might have been, of course, other factors that come into play that might lead to this being a causal connection. However, these are a lot of participants and this is also a lot of data, so I am not 100% positive that this is purely a casualty. With the development of newer technologies, there are also now studies being done basically on a computer. They can create this simulation, it's called molecular docking, where the bodily processes can be simulated and different impacts of different substances and molecules can be observed. And these recent studies, they are from the last 2 years, have actually shown that artificial sweeteners might be linked to other types of cancers. And because I've been talking about cancer and a lot of negative things for the past few minutes, I want to mention that one soda per day, one protein bar, or your, I don't know, daily multivitamin, if it has something in it, is not going to cause any of these things, which by the way are still being researched, and the evidence is not the strongest that it can be to define anything that is going to be enough evidence-based for public health statements. I believe that there has not been any type of reevaluation of the safety levels, specifically because there is not enough data yet to make the correct reevaluation, but there definitely needs to be one. And again, to highlight, swapping out, in case you're now afraid of artificial sweeteners, just changing them for sugar is not going to solve the issue, since a lot of the negative sides of high ingestion of sugar are actually the same as the one of higher ingestion of artificial sweeteners. So your most adequate strategy would be just to not overdo one thing or the other and keep everything in moderation. Again, not one sugar sweetened thing or not one artificially sweetened thing is going to cause any harm that I was talking about here for so long. You need to keep in mind that all of these studies that are done are with chronic intake of the specific artificial sweetener or sugar or anything, so they would be relevant for people that are more on the higher consumption level. And if you're watching videos like this one, you're probably already quite health conscious, so I don't think that you would be overdoing it anyway. Thank you very much for being here with me today. I hope that you enjoyed today's video. Let me know down in the comments below if you want me to do a topic of your interest next time. Also, do not forget to like and subscribe so you do not miss anything new from me, and maybe even check out my website and my nutrition counseling services if you are interested in working with me. Thank you again very much for watching, and I will see you in the next time.